Anyways, oh yeah, and I forgot to mention going into this week, in case you didn't know, I did one game better than John last week. We are now tied again. So once again, this is not for suspense. It's happened. Like trust me, I think either of us would prefer to have a comfortable lead right now. We just don't. So, anyways, those are the picks. Now we're gonna head into the starts and sits for week 12 of fantasy football. So, John, take it away. Help these people make that playoff push or secure their playoff spot.
All right. So starts and sits for this week. Obviously, y'all are probably watching this after the Thanksgiving games, but not including those players simply because of when this video will be released, which has made it a little bit more tough because we have six teams involved in those Thanksgiving games, and then two more teams, which are very fantasy relevant teams. It's the Chiefs and the Cardinals out on bye week. So not a whole lot of stuff to choose from, but we still got some pretty solid starts and sits. And so for I say this every week. I'm not going to tell you to start Jonathan Taylor or sit Jonathan Taylor. Same with all the other studs that are in that sort of category. Those are obvious. These are guys that are more of spot starts, streaming options in case you have bye weeks, or players that maybe you're just not fully confident to put in there yet, but I think they have a really solid matchup. So first up with the starts, two quarterbacks. Cam Newton from the Carolina Panthers. He was on here last week. Cam, he just provides really a safe floor because of his ability to run. I think he's, for the most part, probably good for a rushing touchdown. And so I think you can honestly rely on a good 30, 40 rushing yards and maybe a touchdown. That's like 10 fantasy points right there for your quarterback, just off of running the ball alone. That doesn't include passing the ball. And also they play Miami, who they have a solid secondary, but what are they going to do to stop Christian McCaffrey? I don't think they have the answer. And so I could see Cam having a lot of dink and dunk passes to McCaffrey and DJ Moore out of the slot, turning into massive plays, which are just easy points for him. So Cam Newton from Miami. This next one, we just talked about this in our picks. It's Russell Wilson. And I'll have a caveat here that do this at your own risk. I know in one of my leagues, I have him and Cam Newton. I'm starting Cam over Russell Wilson. But if you are a Russell Wilson owner who doesn't have a solid other option, maybe this is the week that he bounces back. I'm not, 100% confident in him as I am in Cam, but he has a perfect matchup to do it. It's against Washington. We just saw what Cam was able to do against them. Their secondary just hasn't been amazing against the opposing quarterbacks. No Chase Young means there's not going to be as much pressure. Plain and simple, Russell has the matchup to bounce back this week. And so if he's going to do it, it needs to be this one. I think maybe even desperation for his own sake might come into effect. So Russell Wilson, those are the quarterbacks. Moving on to running backs, Damien Harris from the New England Patriots. They play Tennessee, who just hasn't had the most amazing run defense on the year. And also he just seems to be pretty reliable when it comes to getting like probably about 15 touches. You know what you're going to get out of him. And also he tends to be their goal line guy. I think that now that he's fully back from injury, because last week, he was still sort of splitting stuff with Ramondre Stevenson against the Falcons. I still think Stevenson's going to get involved, but not nearly as much as last week. I think Damien will be back to being sort of the full-time guy. And because they don't turn the ball over, they like to rely on the run. I think that Damien Harris has a pretty safe floor and should be getting double digits this week against Tennessee. Next running back, Miles Sanders from the Philadelphia Eagles. I actually was able to get him in one of my leagues, and he is starting. Didn't draft him, but he's now on my team, and he is starting against the Giants. I think they're the most run-heavy team in the league over the last, 5 or so games. And Miles Sanders, we worried that, because of the way the year started and he wasn't getting touches, that maybe his value would fall off. And then maybe even when he came back from injury, he wouldn't be getting the touches that Jordan Howard and Boston Scott and some of these other guys were getting. We saw last week that was not the case. Even against a really tough Saints defense, he had almost 100 rushing yards on the game and, managed to, I think, lead the team in carries as well. So against the Giants, which is a much more favorable matchup, I don't expect things to change. Miles Sanders, start him in your lineups. I think he should be getting double-digit carries. I think he could have a very solid performance in the game. And I think he's also the most talented back when it comes to receiving as well in that team. So I think he's, once again, very safe floor, pretty high ceiling with the matchup. Moving on to wide receiver, rattle these off really quick. Elijah Moore from the New York Jets. I don't need to explain this one much. He's been balling out the last 4 weeks. He's basically been a top 10 fantasy receiver over the past month. and he plays the Texans, who are a pretty favorable matchup. So Elijah Mitchell, put him in your lineups. DJ Moore from the Carolina Panthers. They're playing Miami, and you might be worried, okay, Xavier Howard, Byron Jones on the outside. He could draw some tough matchups. But DJ Moore is the receiver in this offense. They like to move around. They like to get him involved creatively. They put him in the slot sometimes. And also, he just seems to be sort of matchup proof. Even against some top corners over the year, he's been really solid. And just over the entire year, he's been the most targeted receiver in this offense. And I think that's going to be a safe bet. I think he's going to get 8 to 10 targets minimum in this game, just because of, Cam likes to throw the ball to him, as we saw last week. And that's just his role in this offense. So DJ Moore, I would start him. And then finally, Mike Williams from the Chargers. I know that fantasy owners have been a bit upset with him, but last year against the Denver Broncos in their 2 games combined, he had 18 targets, which was good for an average of 9 between those 2 games. So that's a lot of volume, and I think that he could be heavily involved in this one as well. I know that Denver has a much improved defense, especially in the secondary, adding guys like Kyle Fuller, Ronald Darby, Patrick Surtain. But they're also, over the last month, have allowed the 3rd most touchdowns to opposing wide receivers. And we know that Mike Williams is the red zone threat for the Chargers offense when it comes to wide receiver. Keenan Allen always gets involved, but just doesn't seem to be as involved in the red zone. And so I think that Austin Eckler, he's still going to get his touches in the red zone, but Mike Williams could get a touchdown as well. So I'm going to say start Mike Williams in this one. And finally, at tight end, Dalton Schultz from the Dallas Cowboys. He was the start of the week last week at tight end. Just plain and simple, without Amari Cooper there, and potentially even without CeeDee Lamb, I just expect him to be a lot more involved in this passing attack, especially if, your top 2 receivers are Michael Gallup and Cedric Wilson, both very talented guys. But as we saw against the Chiefs, Dalton Schultz sort of became the most reliable target in that game, especially on crucial 3rd down plays. Dak was targeting him a lot. And so I would say start Dalton Schultz as your tight end for this week, even if CeeDee Lamb does play. So moving on to the sits, we're going to start off with Ryan Tannehill from the Tennessee Titans. He's playing Bill Belichick, and he's coming off a performance in which he had 4 interceptions. I just think that Bill, and the way that he is, he could have a really solid defensive outing against Ryan Tannehill in this one. And if A.J. Brown doesn't play, that makes it even worse. If he does play, I expect Bill to put J.C. Jackson on him and try and take him away, even throw some double coverage at him, because there's just not a whole lot of talented receivers behind them. We saw, Julio Jones is on IR. Marcus Johnson, who was the guy who filled in for Julio 2 weeks ago, he went to IR. So now, who's going to step up? We don't know. So I'm just going to say bench Ryan Tannehill. And then the other quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa. They're playing the Carolina Panthers. They don't have a good offensive line. Carolina is built on speed. Hassan Reddick has still been really good this year. Derek Brown, their defensive tackle, is just a monster up the middle. So he can make life difficult. Their secondary was Stephon Gilmore and CJ Henderson and Dante Jackson. I was blanking on his name for a second there. All very good corners. And so I just wouldn't really bet on this Miami offense, who is still without Will Fuller, still without Devontae Parker. Don't really know what you're going to get out of Preston Williams. Jalen Waddle is solid, but he's only one man. I'm not very confident in the Dolphins' offense ability to get much going against Carolina this week. So I'd bench Tua, who over the past month and a half has actually been decently fantasy relevant as a streaming option. But this is not the week that I would do it. Moving on to running backs, Tua's teammate, Myles Gaskin. Plain and simple, Myles Gaskin has been one of the most confusing running backs in fantasy, but there seems to be a really obvious trend for him. And that is when you have easy fantasy matchups, he goes crazy. And when you have unfavorable fantasy matchups, he doesn't do much at all. This is one of those unfavorable fantasy matchups. Once again, a team built on speed. I think they're going to have success stopping him out of the backfield because, whatever, Tua tries to throw at him, the offensive line's not going to give Tua a lot of time. And I think that's going to allow the secondary and just their defense as a whole to feel more confident pressuring and stepping up against the pass as opposed to sitting back. Because, even with the speed Jalen Waddle has, once again, he's one man. So I don't think they're going to be sitting far back from the line of scrimmage. The next running back, and this one, not super fantasy relevant, one of the more talked about waiver wire pickups Dontrell Hilliard from the Tennessee Titans. After the release of Adrian Peterson, and then even the previous week, Hilliard was being picked up in a lot of leagues. Once again, they're playing New England. It's just a really tough matchup. The Patriots have just been absolutely absurd when it comes to point differential over their 5-game win streak. And I could see this easily being another one of those sort of games where they're going to run the ball. They're going to check it down. They're just going to play it safe. And that means they might win the time of possession battle, which means less opportunities for the opposing offense to score. They're going to get pressure on Ryan Tannehill and maybe force him into bad situations, which gets him the ball back even more. So I'm not sure the volume is going to be there for the Titans running backs, but also I just don't know who's going to be the guy. We haven't really had a clear guy be established in that backfield yet. So wouldn't start him. At wide receiver, Odell Beckham Jr. from the Rams. They're facing the Packers, who, if you take away last week against Justin Jefferson, have had a lot of success against the pass, even despite the absence of Jair Alexander. Justin Jefferson obviously had a really good performance, but even including that Justin Jefferson performance, they've been the 8th best secondary against opposing wide receivers in fantasy. So wide receivers are just having a really tough performance against them. And if I'm betting on one of the players in the secondary or in this receiver core to have success against the Packers, it's going to be Cooper Kupp. It's not going to be Odell. Sure, the bye week has probably given him more time to learn the offense, but you've had 2 weeks to really learn the offense, and you're having to take over Robert Woods' role. You're a different player than Robert Woods. I don't know what I'm going to get out of Odell, so I wouldn't bet on this being the week that you can really rely on him. I think it'll come at some point, but not this week. The next sit at wide receiver, Marquez Valdes Scantling from the Packers. I think a lot of people might be looking at this guy because, they play Jalen Ramsey, and that might mean that Davante Adams gets less targeted. I don't think that's the case. I don't know the exact stats of how targeted Davante Adams was in the last time they played the Rams. I think it was in the playoffs last year. But I don't expect that I don't expect Davante Adams to see a downtick in involvement in the Packers offense. Once again, they get creative when it comes to beating Jalen Ramsey. We saw it last year. I don't think that changes. It's Aaron Rodgers. I would still take him and Davante Adams against anybody, including Jalen Ramsey, as dominant as he is, to put up points. And so I'm not really going to rely on Marquez Valdes Scantling to necessarily have a major uptick in volume and be any different than he normally is. That's not going to say that he's going to have a bad game, but I'm not going to sit here and say that he's a safe pick simply because of who's going to be guarding Davante Adams. And also, for the record, I'm not even sure that Jalen Ramsey is going to be shadowing him. Ramsey hasn't really shadowed many receivers over the last couple of years since he's come to the Rams. Very few receivers that he's ever done it against. So who knows what we'll see. If he's not shadowing Davante Adams, then that means that he could be even matching up against Marquez Valdes Scantling in some of these plays. And the next wide receiver to sit, Cortland Sutton. This one pains me because I loved him in fantasy to start the year. I have him on a few of my teams, but they're playing the Chargers, who we know the way they play is they're going to put 2 safeties deep. They don't allow anything deep, and that's sort of what's kept Cortland Sutton relevant in fantasy is the deep ball. When they come to short and underneath, it's a lot of Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon dump-offs. It's a lot of Jerry Jeudy getting involved. It's a lot of Noah Fant, and it's even Tim Patrick. So I think when it comes to the short and medium game, Cortland Sutton is probably the 6th option in this offense when it comes to that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't be betting on Cortland Sutton. Plus, he just hasn't really been getting involved in the offense much since Jerry Jeudy returned because that's sort of taken away any of his value, once again, in the short and medium stuff. So he's sort of just relegated to the deep ball, which I'm not going to rely on Teddy to do that against a team that sits deep. And so the final sit of the week at tight end, Dan Arnold from the Jacksonville Jaguars. This might be a little surprising to some just because Dan Arnold has been one of the more fantasy relevant tight ends on the year, but he's coming off a game in which I think he had 0 points. And the Falcons, although they're not a great defense, they do have some solid guys like Deion Jones that can go up against the tight ends for Jacksonville. And so I'm just not really relying on Dan Arnold to be the guy this week against the Falcons, who are more likely to be getting burned by James Robinson and even the outside receivers. So wouldn't be relying on Dan Arnold this week against Atlanta, even though on paper it seems like it'd be a decent matchup. So those are the starts and sits for week 12. If you got any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. We're more likely to respond on our Instagram, though, at Shut Up and Ball Pod. So feel free to go there. We're going to be posting these on Instagram as well. You can see other people dropping their questions, and you can drop your own, and we'll respond to every single comment on there as well before game day. So follow us there, drop your questions, and there as well.
Yeah, and just for those, like, further proof, I started Russell Wilson this week in one of my leagues. Granted, it's because I have Josh Allen and Carson Wentz, and I'm just not confident in either of those two. I went with the Russell Wilson hopefully for the upside, but so we'll see. So yeah, we don't just say this and like not follow it. Like, this is what we truly believe in starts and sits, especially John. So yeah, so that wraps up.
I'm in my leagues. Just to go off of this, I am starting out of these. I'm starting Cam Newton, Damien Harris, Miles Sanders, Elijah Moore, DJ Moore, and Dalton Schultz. So I'm starting all of these guys among my 4 leagues. The only 2 I'm not are Russ, because I'm starting Cam over him, and then Mike Williams because I don't own him in any leagues. Yeah. So I believe in these guys.
I understood. So yeah, that will be all for week 12. Once again, follow us on Instagram, like John mentioned, which is at Shut Up and Ball Pod. For Twitter and TikTok, it's just at Shut Up and Ball. And then we have a Facebook page, Shut Up and Ball. And then we also have a YouTube, and the audio goes up on all podcast streaming services. Usually it goes up earlier. So if you're really trying to get this information quick, that's the place to go. Otherwise, it'll come out on YouTube periodically. But like I mentioned, that is all for us. Enjoy your Thanksgiving if you celebrate that. If not, just have a good weekend. Be safe on Black Friday, people.
Yeah,
but enjoy those savings, whether you do Black Friday or Cyber Monday or do neither. Regardless, enjoy your weekend. We will see you all next week.